London hovers between good business and the Brexit blues. The investment banks are doing well, but business is threatening to migrate. The government is vying for ideas. In the UK, the cap on banker bonuses could be abolished. I talked about this in another video. Bank managers let this test balloon fly. They would like to get rid of the cap introduced by the EU 7 years ago, which limits bonuses and success bonuses to twice the fixed salary. The Times reported that it had been discussed in confidential post-Brexit consultations with the government. But the trial balloon burst. The Ministry of Finance has denied it. Such a move would be controversial. But what is the government planning to ease or change regulations after Brexit? We haven't seen a major change in finance so far, says Andrew Pilgrim of accounting and advisory firm EY. However, after Finance Minister Rishi Sunak's speech in July, it had become clear to everyone that Britain was no longer building on equivalence with EU regulation. Brussels ultimately blocked recognition of the British rules. The climate is pretty poisoned, said a bank insider. Britain must now find its own way. In the city, most had hoped for a very close connection to EU rules. Equivalence, which Brussels attests, would continue to promise them unhindered EU market access. In his Mansion House speech, Sunak highlighted the opportunities that an independent nation has through its own regulation. He said the UK will use its newfound freedoms to take its own approach. But what does that mean? London bank managers are currently being showered with papers, drafts, and minutes of advice. Are there any changes in regulation? So far, none. Technical details are being worked on, such as the revision of the EU Solvency II directive for insurers and MiFID II for financial market providers. It's all tiny little things. 8 months after leaving the EU internal market, the city is in a strange divided position. On the one hand, business is going well. During the crisis, the investment banks earned billions by procuring urgently needed liquidity for companies through bond issues, loans, and in some cases, share capital increases. In addition, the number of IPOs in 2021 is higher than it has been in a long time. The stock markets have recovered from COVID, trading is booming, the economy is growing. It's going really well for the investment banks, advisors, and dealers, says a German banker who has been working on the Thames for 30 years. The recruiting competition for young employees is crazy at the moment. The salaries are high, he says. On the other hand, there's also a lot of Brexit blues in London. According to the EY survey, between the Brexit vote 5 years ago and this summer, only around 7,500 jobs have been relocated from London to EU financial centres. Given the more than a third of a million financial jobs in London, that's only about 3%. Andrew Pilgrim from EY says that had no significant impact on employment in the financial sector in Great Britain. With a policy of favourable recognition of equity for the banks, the British government avoided a negative Big Bang in London, says Hubertus Veth of the Frankfurt location initiative Frankfurt Main Finance. But there was and still is bloodletting. Banks had to obtain EU licenses in order to continue offering certain transactions to EU customers. They have opened new offices in Frankfurt, Paris, Dublin, Madrid, Milan, Amsterdam, and Luxembourg. And in addition to employees, total assets have been moved. The moves from London are painful for the city, especially when you consider that they are often very high-ranking bankers, the heads of entire department, as well as a real fat cats with an income of twice the million who are also large taxpayers. That's a loss, says one investment banker. Conversely, financial centers like Frankfurt have benefited from the relocation of jobs. According to estimates by Hubertus Veth from Frankfurt Main Finance, 3,500 new jobs have been created in Frankfurt so far because of Brexit. Corona has delayed the further relocation of jobs. We expect 1,500 to 2,000 additional jobs for Frankfurt in the next 2 or 3 years, says Veth. The European Central Bank, the ECB, is also an important factor. The ECB is pushing and applying considerable pressure to have more senior bankers relocated to the EU, says an insider. But what could the British government do to make London or the island more attractive as a whole through deregulation? Andrew Pilgrim from EY says, there's already hope that the UK can be faster, more flexible and more innovative in regulation, for example in areas such as fintechs, digital companies, artificial intelligence. They no longer have to consult with 27 other countries and they can take more risks, but that can backfire. Finance Minister Sunak is focusing on the financing and IPOs of fast-growing fintechs, some of which have already reached billions in valuations. With the regulation of long-term investing funds, London could gain by easing. That's at least what Fed believes. And he says that would be wise because infrastructure financing has enormous potential and EU regulation is very complex. But it does have reason to do that. Clearing the settlement of euro-denominated interest rate derivatives threatens London. For Deutsche Börse, this means the opportunity to gain further market share, says Fed. The transition period granted by Brussels after Brexit will expire in 10 months. And so you shouldn't forget at the moment when you talk about Brexit, there's still a number of transition periods in place. We are not at the end of it when everything is in full force. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich. After winning a second term as London's mayor in May 2012, an ebullient Boris Johnson promised to devote his time fighting for a good deal for the UK capital. Yet, less than a decade later, the city that made the British Prime Minister's political career risks becoming an economic casualty of his premiership. There's a danger that London turns into collateral damage from the mantra to focus on the provincial regions that backed leaving the European Union and cemented the Conservative Party's power. Business leaders in London warn the government and with more and more urgency that it needs more effort to boost the engine of the UK growth in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. If London's economy does not get back firing on all cylinders, that will have all kinds of consequences, including for government revenue and its ability to run its levelling up agenda, said John Dickey, Chief Executive Officer of London First, a business lobby group. And he says, central London has been dramatically levelled down over the past 18 months. A cocktail of factors are weighing on London. They include the greater ability of its office workers to work from home and reliance on international tourism that's been curtailed by COVID-19 and regular changes to the UK's travel rules. The London Financial Services District is still at the mercy of haggling with the European Union after Johnson largely neglected the industry in his Brexit negotiations. Google mobility data puts London's struggles in stark relief. While office attendance in cities like Manchester and Birmingham is approaching pre-pandemic levels, it's still less than half what it was in the capital. London also has the greatest proportion of furloughed workers in England and its lowest vaccination rate, in part because of its relatively young population. Businesses are calling on ministers to respond. Jace Tyrrell, CEO of the New West End company, wants ministers to reform business taxes, relax visa rules and entry requirements for travelers from the Middle East and Asia, and lengthen Sunday trading hours. He's concerned the government is complacent about London's ability to return to full economic power. Footfall in the West End shopping and entertainment district was down 50% on pre-virus levels in the week beginning July 26th, according to the new West End company. Of course, it will bounce back, said Tyrrell, whose group represents 600 businesses in London's shopping and entertainment district. And he says, the challenge is whether it's going to take 2 years, 5 years or 10 years. The quicker London recovers, the sooner Treasury can start restoring its balance sheet. That's what's being missed at the moment. The city of 9 million people helped make Johnson's political career, and London seemingly had little to worry about in 2012. It hosted the Olympics that summer, showcasing its status as a global metropolis with Johnson as its cheerleader. The advent of the word Brexit that year was barely noticed with Greece in crisis, let alone on its way to becoming just a reality. Project Reality, just saying. Yet the government's action post-Brexit have nurtured the perception London isn't a priority. Since coming to power, Johnson has moved civil service jobs to parts of northern England, where he made electoral advances in 2019. Last year, the government forced City Hall, run by the opposition Labour Party, to increase public transportation fares as a condition of bailout money for the network after the pandemic wiped out revenue. For Richard Birch, CEO of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the quarrel over funding suggested the government sees the capital as a political endeavour rather than an economic endeavour. The government said in a statement that it's fully aware of the damage wrought on London by the pandemic and is working closely with the municipality and transport chiefs to support the recovery. Businesses have received more than £3.5 billion in support, it said. Minister for London Paul Scully said the government will help pay for the cost of COVID-19, but it won't automatically pay for the choices of the mayor. The point is that taxpayers in the north of England shouldn't be subsidizing London commuters, he said. The paradox is that London may not hold enough political capital for Johnson, yet it's the dynamo to lead the recovery out of the pandemic that could be key to his future electoral fortunes. He left office just weeks before the Brexit vote in 2016 as he spearheaded the campaign to leave the EU. After becoming Prime Minister 3 years later, his focus shifted to seats in Labour's so-called Red Wall in northern England in the 2019 election. Johnson himself sought to allay concerns about his levelling up plans in a speech last month. It is vital to understand the differences between this project and levelling down, he said. And he said, we don't think you can make the poor parts of the country richer by making the rich parts poorer. Yeah, but why is he doing it then? But the perception remains. The capital voted 60% to stay in the EU, and in the election, Labour won 49 of London's 73 seats. Johnson's Labour successor as mayor, Sadiq Khan, won a second term in May, beating his Conservative opponent by 55% to 45%. The Conservative government has pitted London against other parts of the country, said Rushanara Ali, a Labour Member of Parliament representing a London district. They have built this narrative. Khan said in an emailed response to questions to media that the focus should be on getting people back into the city's offices and other workplaces. On July 31st, visits to cafes, shops, cinemas and attractions in London were 44% below pre-pandemic levels, Google mobility data shows. Those two workplaces were 52% lower. Hotel occupancy in London was 31% in May, the lowest of any English region based on the latest Visit Britain figures. The problem for London is that there's more political priority over, let's say, manufacturing jobs in the north than a far greater number in financial services, higher education or hospitality in the capital, said Jonathan Ports, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. The Prime Minister is neglecting London both rhetorically and in practice, he said. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.